Greetings, friends. Welcome back. We are the Board Game Barrister. I'm Anthony, joined today by Andy and Elizabeth, and we have been playing Pathfinder Elemental Stones, a game where you play as an elemental sovereign, shaping and changing the landscape before you with transmutation in order to place the stones in beautiful patterns so that you can show your dominance and control.
Let's get into it. Welcome to Pathfinder Elemental Stones, where we're going to be placing and manipulating these stone tiles to try to dominate the elements. To start the game, we're going to put one of each different type of stone on these starting spaces in the center of the board. We've got wood, earth, metal, fire, water, and air. We're also going to draw a series of extra stones from the bag and put each of them in their designated spot out here on the edges of the board. Each player is also going to get a random sovereign card, and that sovereign card is going to tell them what type of element they represent. They'll score extra points at the end of the game for all the patterns that have been scored in that element. Everyone's also going to get a secret objective card, which will tell you a specific pattern or alignment of tiles in your element you're trying to assemble as many times as possible out there on the board. So because we're the wood sovereign, our objective card says that for each set of 3 wood tiles in a row like this, at the end of the game, we're going to score 4 points. And last, everyone's going to get 5 pattern cards, and they're going to choose 2 of those they'd like to keep, then discard the rest. Since we're playing as the wood sovereign, I'm going to grab a wood pattern card here, and then just a simple one that I think I might be able to accomplish early on. The last thing each player gets before we get started is 2 random tiles out of the bag. The structure of a turn in this game is super straightforward. The first thing you're going to do is look at these pairs of tiles that we've drawn from the bag. Each player at the beginning of their turn gets to take one of these pairs of tiles of their choice. And then next up, you take 3 actions. Now, an action can be a number of different things, and we'll go through each of those now. The first type of action you can take is to draw another pattern into your hand. So we've got available patterns out here on the table that any player can take for an action on their turn. So for instance, if we wanted to, we could really assert our dominance over the wood element, and we could take this pattern card into our hand as well and have one more pattern we'd be working toward. Next up, you can place stones from your hand out onto the board. This is our hand at the moment, and for a single action, we can place a single stone from our hand out on the board, or if we have matching tiles, we can place any number of matching element tiles out onto the board. The only caveat there is that when you do it, you have to place each tile next to the previous one you put down. So I'm going to put 2 tiles out for 1 action. And you might notice there we've already built the pattern on that card we just took this turn. The patterns can be rotated in any direction they need to, but they can't be mirrored. So if I had to flip over this shape in order to complete it, this wouldn't count as that pattern. But it does, so let's take advantage of it. One of the other actions you can take is to score one of the pattern cards in your hand. So I'm going to show all the other players this pattern, and I'm going to put this card out in front of me to signify that I've got 3 points at the end of the game waiting for me, and that I've also contributed to the wood element by scoring this card. So maybe I'm showing my hand a little bit there as to which sovereign I'm playing, but you gotta play cards sometime, right? So that was 3 actions. That means that's the end of my turn, and we're gonna move on to the next player's turn. The bank of available tiles and the available pattern cards don't refresh until the entire round ends. So we're gonna wait until everybody has gone, and then we'll refresh those things, so each player that goes has fewer options as to which of these tiles they're going to take. So once everybody's had a turn, we're gonna refresh both of those areas with new tiles and new pattern cards. Somebody else is gonna be first player this time, so we don't get first dibs every single time we go. And maybe things look a little bit more like this by the time our turn comes around. There's 2 more types of actions you can take on your turn that we didn't take on our first, and one of them is the one that really makes this game unique, and it's the transmute action. When you choose to transmute, you can actually change what an element tile is into a different one, and a super simple example of transmuting is actually going to help us finish this pattern that we started the game with. When you want to transmute a tile, you're going to look at the type of tile you want to transmute out here on the edge of the board, and you're allowed to transmute that tile into either of the tile types that's next to it on the board. So I can transmute earth into fire, and I can transmute it into metal. Fire feels like a great option, that's what we're looking for, right? So for 1 action, I could transmute that earth into a fire, and that earth tile then goes out onto the edge of the board where it belongs. You can only transmute a tile if there are tiles available to take from the edge of the board. So currently nothing can be transmuted into water because there's no water to go around. So we've got our pattern complete. We're going to score that card, get a few more points for ourselves. The other thing you can do when you transmute is transmute the stones in your hand, and that action is special in that you can transmute multiple tiles for a single action as long as they match. So since we've got 2 earth tiles in our hand, I could transmute both of these if I wanted to, but they both have to become the same element when I do it. And the last type of action you can take is to discard a card from your hand. If we thought we weren't going to score this, or we were going to run out of time before the game ended before we scored it, we can just use an action to get it out of our hand. And the main reason you'd want to do this is that every card in the game has a number of points you're going to score if you happen to score this pattern, but if it's still in your hand at the end of the game, there's a small number under that, and that's how many points you'll lose if it's still in your hand at the end of the game and you haven't scored it. The last thing to know about this game is the air tiles. You'll never see an air tile appear in a pattern because airs count as wilds. They can act as any tile that they need to when you're completing a pattern. The catch is that just like when you're transmuting, that tile has to be available for you to swap in from the edge of the board. We're going to keep playing tiles, transmuting tiles, scoring patterns until one player has a certain number of cards in front of them depending on how many players you have. That's going to trigger the end of the game, and we're going to make sure everybody's had an even number of turns, so we'll finish the round and then we'll score up. That's everything you need to know about elemental stones. The player with the most points at the end is the winner.
All right, so this was Anthony and Andy's first time playing it. I have played it a couple times before, both with a 2-player game and a 3-player game. The game is reasonably flexible between people who want to think through that sequencing and, min-maxing those points, and people who are just kind of discovering the game and saying, oh, this seems like a good combination. It seems pretty accessible to both types of players.
Yeah, I would say that this is really easy to figure out how to play. I will not use the word master, but there's the number of actions that you're allowed to take on a turn and how they are very synergistic, how they work together, makes the game very approachable.
So we can do something like this.
Wow.
And score this. Right.
Yep.
Player boy.
Yeah.
And then I will take this.
Nice, so that's 1, 2,
For I am
3.
out of patterns. That's it.
There is an element of luck because what tiles get drawn out of the bag can impact how much of that resource is even available for the entire game. But the nice thing is there's always something you can do as a player, even if you're new to the game or new to gaming just in general. There's always something that you can be working on. There's always choices. You're never going to feel like, oh, I'm completely left behind. I have no valid moves left. We've seen pattern building tile placement games before, but I think that what Elemental Stones does that's really different is allow you to play everything of a color all at once, and the transmutation of changing one element into another element.
I don't mind if you
not
slow
the
down.
plan.
I don't mind if you slow down.
I transmute this into a yellow
Oh my.
for my second action.
Wow.
Okay.
I transmute this into red for my third action.
Wow! I personally enjoy the hidden objectives of the game and which sovereign you are actually mattering. There's a nice amount of variation to the way that you're supposed to style the board as you play through it that I think is really interesting.
The objectives can be at loggerheads with each other.
Yes, they definitely are.
Well, and as an individual player, it's nice to be able to take the pattern cards and kind of assemble those in your mind into helping you finish your big pattern. Mine was easy on me because all I had to do was glom a ton of fire together on the board, so I just kept picking patterns that had large areas of fire on them and saying, well, I'll just keep throwing fire into this big area here. But it is a really cool kind of progression of the game where you get pattern card, finish pattern, get points for it, and slowly have those patterns help you toward your big final objective as well.
Yes, at the end of the game where I looked at the board and I said, oh, look at those tiles that are going to be worth so many points if only I had water. Oh, look, now I have all the water because it was easy enough to transmute towards it. And I scored, 14 points in one turn?
Yeah.
I was very far behind because Andy was kicking our butts, but outside of that, it was pretty good. It felt really strong to be able to do that in a single turn.
Well, and things kind of had aligned for me nicely where I could just keep doing my strategy without having to shift it up, but you were able to be really adaptable and in part identify that nobody else was playing the Water Sovereign because we weren't making moves that made that clear, and there was an enormous stack of water ready to be transmuted out of that pocket in the corner, so it was a really good last-minute decision to jump into that, and you almost pulled it off.
4, 5, 6. Right, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a do pattern. So I'm gonna score 1. I'm gonna score 2.
Yep.
Fine.
Yeah, it was great. It felt like you could sit any group of people who wanted a kind of thinky game, but that's not going to just explode your brain down at a table, play this for 30 to 45 minutes probably. It gives you really simple objectives and tools, straightforward tools to accomplish those objectives in really satisfying ways. So just a solid game for anybody who wants to play a middleweight, thinky pattern building game. Alright, I think that does it for Pathfinder Elemental Stones. Thank you so much for joining us. We had a really good time with this one. We hope you had a fun time watching. And as always, hit that like button, leave a comment if you got one, subscribe so you can see our new videos every week when we post them, and check out our online store. We got Pathfinder Elemental Stones in there, as well as a bunch of other cool stuff. Thanks so much for this time, and we will see you next week.